call him because he had signed that law. And as I was meeting with some of the Latino professionals in that area, asking them to come and join us, you know what they said? Well, in California, you can do all that stuff. But in Arizona, no se puede. You can't do that in Arizona. And my response to them was, sí se puede.
Absolutely.
Yes,
I love that. I love that. And so you are truly an icon for advocates around the world and, of course, in this room. What emotions drove you to activism, and how did that emotion shape your voice?
Well, I think like many of us women, people of color, sometimes youth, sometimes people that are elderly, you know, we face discrimination.
Absolutely.
And when we have these acts, discriminatory acts against us, we get pretty angry.
Yeah.
But we don't have any place to channel that anger. And ever since I was a youngster and going again, facing all of these racial discriminations, you know, I always thought there's got to be some way that we can change this, right? And so I finally met a great individual who taught me, Cesar and others, how we can change it. And the way that we change it is that we come together, we organize, and then we become activists.
Right.
We advocate, we organize, and this is how we change all of these policies that have been there for so many, many generations to change it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, how did your work to make sure those you were advocating on behalf of shared in leadership and they were able to build power in the process? How were they able to build power in this process?
Well, the way that we build power is the way that we organize, is to convince people, number one, that they do have power. They may not have a high school education or a college education. They may not be citizens, but they do have power.
Absolutely.
And the power is in their person, okay? But people just have to understand that. And that is kind of magical, because a lot of people think they don't have power. And unless you're somebody that has, like, again, a college education, that there's nothing that you can do. So the farm workers were being, as you know, oppressed. And many people tried to organize farm workers, but all of the attempts failed. But the one secret was that we told the workers, you know what? Nobody is going to change your conditions for you. You are the ones, you know what the problems are that you have. You know the solutions that you need. And you can't wait for somebody to come in from the outside.
Absolutely.
You have to organize. You have to come together. You are the ones that have to take the action to change this. And if not, if you don't do that, nothing will ever change.
Yes. Yes.
But to do that, we have to go family by family, house by house, and really convince people that they have power. And once they get convinced and they start organizing and they see the changes that they can make, it's a transformation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, Dolores, I know that you have come in contact with many advocates who have either quit their jobs or just completely stopped and dropped what they were doing to join you in the fight alongside with you. So I want to know, what strategies do you believe are most effective for leaders to establish trust with those advocates?
Well, I think number one is being the example. And the other thing that we have to know is that we can't do it by ourselves, right? And the only way that we could really make things happen is we have to recruit other people to join in the struggle. And I think that's part of being an organizer and part of being a leader. And you know, a leader is somebody that has to bring other people along with them.
Absolutely. And so we're gonna take a step back just a few years. So I want to know, as you look toward the future, are you as optimistic today as you were when you began as a 25-year-old community activist?
Yeah, even though it seemed like in our country we're in a very difficult place. I mean, I think we have been there before in the past, right? And it's kind of like the past is catching up with us. And so we know that we have to take more bolder actions. And there's one thing I just want to say. One of the things that we're fighting, of course, in addition to homophobia and sexism, we're fighting racism, right? The racism has been such a part of our United States of America, starting from slavery days, right?
Absolutely.
And we know that a lot of the division in our country right now comes from slavery. And the one thing that we have to do is to fix our educational system so that in our curriculums in our schools, starting with kids in kindergarten and first grade, that we have one strong message, that we are one human race.
Absolutely.
And our human race, which is Homo sapiens, that's our scientific name.
Absolutely.
And that our human race came from Africa. So we can say to all those neo-Nazis and white supremacists, get over it, you're Africans, okay? Just get over it, you're Africans.
I think that deserves.
And I like to say to everybody in the audience, take the hand of the person next to you. Take the hand of the person next to you.
Absolutely.
Turn to that person and say, hello, African relative.
Hello, African relatives. Hello, African relatives.
And if we could kind of promote that and do that everywhere that we go, with our families, with our friends, because a lot of people don't know that. And the reason they don't know that is because it's not taught in our schools. It was taught in my school. I remember in the 3rd grade that we were taught that. I remember that. And I think we really have to start teaching that again so that people will understand that we are all related. We are all Homo sapiens. We are all one human family.
Absolutely. I think that deserves a round of applause. Just one more, just one more. Thank you, thank you. And so I want to kind of stay in this area of the youth, and I'm going to give a shameless plug. So there's an HBCU in Nashville, Tennessee, called Meharry Medical College, and they just launched their inaugural program for global health equity. And so you have champions for change that start very young or that at least are college age. So let's look at the climate of what's going on. And for college age students who want to be out there and be in the field and advocate. So I want to know, what advice would you give to young people who want to advocate for their beliefs in human rights, even if it puts their education or their jobs at risk?
Yeah, I think we have to do that. I mean, I was fired more than once for advocating. I remember once I was had a job doing rentals in a public housing project, but it was all segregated. They had all the Anglos in one section of the housing project. They had all the Latinos in another section, all the African American people in another section. So when I did the rentals, I mixed everybody up. And I got fired. I got fired for that. That was before we had the fair practice of fair housing laws in California. So then I was fired from the police department. I was a deputy sheriff. And I was fired because I was advocating for some of the prisoners. I got fired from that job too. But that's good to be fired.
Yes.
Because I think those are learning lessons as we go through life.
Absolutely.
But I think also, with our children, and we have to start them as young as possible. And my children grew up in poverty because when we were organizing the farm workers, we didn't receive wages. We had stipends. We got like $10 a week. And the union provided for our food and our expenses, our gasoline, automobiles, etc. But all of my kids grew up really strong, and even though they were very poor. And so just because kids are poor, it doesn't mean that they cannot really have opportunities and have so many lessons of that they can be strong also and be independent and resourceful. And so I think it's really important, and I know this is what this is all about, that we start with our children as young as we possibly can to make them understand that they have a role in life, they have a role in the future, and that they are the future, though, but making them as strong as possible, as my children grew up and became very strong. My oldest son is a doctor. a medical doctor.
Right.
And my other son's an attorney, and I have teachers and nurses, and people that are advocates. So I think it's important to give kids those role models since they're very small.
Yes, absolutely. And so you've heard it here first. Dolores Huerta has said it is okay to be fired just as long as it's for a cause. You get fired for a cause, not just because. And so we've heard the term very often, nothing new is under the sun, right? And so I want to know, how does violence against advocates and activities affect their ability to promote change? What strategies can be implemented to protect them to ensure to continue effectiveness in their advocacy efforts?
Well, I think nonviolence is another thing that we should start advocating for. And again, when children are very, very young. And nonviolence, it's not just a physical violence, it's also verbal violence, right?
Absolutely.
The words that we use when we taunt each other or we insult each other. And I think children can learn that, if they understand the precepts of nonviolence from the time that they're very young, and that they carry that on through life.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so let's shift gears. As you all can see that we are both female leaders on this stage. So I have to ask, it's not unusual for female leaders to be overshadowed by their male counterparts. And has it ever bothered you that Cesar Chavez is often described as a leader of the farm workers movement, even though you were equally partners?
Well, I have to say that when we started the union, Cesar said to me, well, is it okay if I'm the spokesperson for the organization? I didn't have my feminist lens on then. Had I had them on, I would have said, okay, you be the spokesperson half of the time, and I'll be the spokesperson the other half of the time. What actually happened is because we could not have won our struggle without the great boycott. And people, I was in New York City for 4 years, and I became the spokesperson for the union because nobody knew who Cesar Chavez was, right? So actually I did become the spokesperson, and my job with the organization was to promote women within the union also, which was not easy because many women would not even take the roles, I had them as committee members, for the places where we got contract. Today, you'll be glad to know that the president of the United Farm Workers is a woman, Teresa Romero. And the majority of the board are also women.
Right.
Yeah.
So that is a Voices for Healthy Kids exclusive. Thank you. And so how did being a woman in a male-dominated field impact your work? And what advice do you have for young women activists today?
Well, I think it's always very difficult, as the women in the room know, when you are the only woman, or when a woman in any kind of a position that you have, because we still have sexism with us. It's still alive and well today. And we as women, and I know sometimes it's often hard because when we're fighting sexism, often it's about people that we like and that we respect, right? It could be members of our own family or some of the co-workers or some of our employers. But we just have to keep at it, chipping away, and then correct people when they do these sexist remarks and sexist practices. And sometimes they're not very visible, right? But we know that there's intention out there to keep women down. So we just have to organize other women and make sure that we have a constant intention to say, yeah, we're going to stop sexism, okay, no matter where it exists. And I do want to mention that at the national level, we are trying to get the Equal Rights Amendment passed, okay? It will be the 28th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking, don't we already have that? We do not. But this next Congress, we can't make it happen, okay? We're just about a few votes away from getting the ERA passed. And so when you talk to your Congress people, whoever they happen to be, get them to commit that they will vote for the Equal Rights Amendment. Can we do that? Yes, again.
We can make that pledge. We can make that pledge. And so we appreciate you for letting us know how organizations and societies effectively address these barriers to promote gender equity and in leadership roles. And so we've heard you say that you can't help people unless you work with people, right? And we have a lot of individuals in power that shape our public policy that have never walked a mile in our shoes. So I want to know, do you believe that those who shape public policy should have relatable experiences?
Well, I think it helps, but I don't think it's always necessary.
Okay.
And I use the example of Fred Ross Sr., and you can write that name down, everybody. There's a documentary that's coming out about him, actually this month of September. But Fred Ross came from a Republican family. He was an Anglo, a teacher at University of Southern California. And then he was assigned to work with farm workers in a labor camp there in Arvin, California. He had never worked with poor people before, so it was an eye-opener for him.
Okay.
Yeah, and then, of course, there he learned how to organize, and then he went on to teach the rest of us how to organize. So this is a man that he didn't go to our footsteps, right, but he had the empathy and the talent and the gift of teaching, of being a great teacher. So I think it always helps. But then we have the other problem too, that we have people who come out of our community and then they get elected, and then what happens? They get corrupted, right?
Yeah.
They get corrupted by money. And so somebody that you thought you're going to support them because he's a Latino or he's a person of color, and then they turn their backs on us. So it's not a criteria. I think it helps. But I think people's values are really what is the most important, and those are what we have to look at.
Okay. Absolutely. Thank you for that. And so looking back, what do you consider your most significant achievements, and what do you hope your legacy will be?
Well, I passed a lot of laws in Sacramento.
Yeah, a whole bunch.
Yeah, a whole bunch, yeah. Including getting rid of deputy registrars in California. When you register to vote, but you don't have to have a deputy registrar. And we just passed another law. I hope the governor signs it if you want to send Governor Newsom a little message. And this is to have automatic voter registration, so that we don't have to register voters at all in California. Message on, please sign the bill, okay? It's SB 299, automatic voter registration. They already have it in 10 different states. So California, we're not going to be the first, but we can be the 11th state that does that.
All right.
So, and then I worked very much on the amnesty bill of 1986, where a lot of people got their legalization status in the United States of America.
Okay.
And then I think just organizing and trying to change so many, not only the laws, but getting a lot of women elected to office. I think that was a big one also.
Absolutely. And when we talk about legacy, and I use a lot of phrases, I am from the deep South, I'm from Mississippi. And so we say this thing where we say, you all walked so we could run, or you all crawled so we could walk. But when I sit up here and tell you, you all sprinted, I don't know what we're gonna do, maybe fly, because you all have set a precedent and your legacy will forever live on. And so we appreciate you for your wisdom in this type of space. So I do want to know, how do you stay motivated and hopeful in the face of ongoing struggles for justice and equality?
Well, I think in today's world, people have so many tools at their disposal that we didn't have. You know, people have the internet, they have all the devices, you know, so you can get messages out very quickly. Absolutely. You can organize very quickly. So you have a lot of advantages. But I think the one thing that's missing is people have to know the history of other struggles, so we can take from those lessons, from the lessons of the civil rights movement, the lessons from the suffragettes, the women who fought for suffrage. By the way, today is National Voter Registration Day, everybody.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, if people haven't registered to vote, we have to celebrate that.
Yes.
From the labor movement. And these are things also that we have to include in our curriculum in education. I like to ask audiences, and I'm going to ask this one. Yeah. How many of us know how we got the 8-hour day? Raise your hand if you know.
Alan, Josh, there's a few people. Petra, she knows.
So what happened to the labor leaders in Chicago at the turn of the last century that fought for the 8-hour day? We don't know their names. They were executed. They were hung. And these are things that are not in our curriculums in schools, and we've got to fight to get that back, get labor history back into our school lessons.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm so excited you mentioned technology. Like I said, I do media advocacy for our Voices team. So I want to know, besides being able to get information a lot quicker and a lot more in an advanced way than years ago, do you think that with new technology, I'll say AI specifically, do you think that that would help or possibly harm individuals who are trying to spread our history?
Well, I think it's a question that everybody has right now. We know that AI can be very, very helpful in helping you write your term paper. And making a last-minute report on something. But we have to be, I think, be really careful that it doesn't replace human beings.
Yes.
Not only in the writing world and in the art world, but also I think to make sure that we don't have AI robots that could kill people. No?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I want to jump into what I like to call some light-hearted questions. We've been going really, really hard about advocacy and giving some gems to our audience. So I want to know, how many times do you think you've said "si se puede"?
I would say hundreds of times. Hundreds of times.
And so we found out recently that you love jazz. So you love jazz music?
Oh, yes, I love jazz.
So are you still into jazz music? Could you tell us some of your favorite artists? Or?
Well, I think one that we heard of here in the hotel, Billie Holiday. We've all been hearing her sing here. And then Charlie Parker. I'm kind of old school.
Yeah.
I really haven't had time to catch up with the new jazz artists, but we know there's a lot of them.
Yes, I'll have to tell you some new jazz artists, but definitely a fan of jazz as well. And so we want to know that you have 11 children. So is there a surprising fact that only they know about you that maybe the Voices can have an exclusive that maybe we don't know about you?
Well, my children know that I like to watch Colbert every single night at 11:30 at night. And Rachel Maddow also, you know, so I will stay up late to watch Colbert.
All right.
But another thing, though, that I think my grandchildren do know that I'm very proud of, and I know that there are people in the audience here that share this story with me, that I was a Girl Scout.
Oh!
From the time I was 8 till the time I was 18.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, for 10 years of my life.
What have you done? I'm extremely fascinated with you, and you are just a foot away from me. I know that in this space and in today's day, we talk about mental health a lot. So what's some advice that you could give to individuals in the advocacy space to maintain their mental health? There are individuals here that have been working on policy for years, right? But you want to make sure that only your campaign is only as good as you are, right? So we want some advice on how to make sure we maintain grace and make sure our mental health is there. Well,
I think that is such a big issue for us. I think all of us are astounded, I think, at how so many of our young people now have mental health issues.
Yes.
And what are we going to do about it? And again, I'm glad that you're having this symposium here, because we know that we have to start with our children since they're very young, and to make sure that they do not get involved with drugs, you know? And I think that as we've talked about the racism and the sexism in our society, that I think that also affects people in terms of their mental health, because people don't know how to counteract it or how to fight against it. So I just think we have to really fight to make sure that we get more funding. We do know there's not enough funding for mental health, there's not enough funding for disability. And that we see mental health as a disability issue, you know, because people, we think of somebody, if you've got a broken leg and I see you on the street, I'm gonna call an ambulance, right?
Yes.
But if we see somebody that's talking to themselves on the street, we just walk by that person. That person has a mental health issue. And so we're ignoring, I think, the magnitude of the mental health problems that we have in our country.
Yeah. And so
we don't have enough institutions. Okay. We don't have enough doctors. We don't have enough facilities. And I think it's got to be something that we've got to kind of move up to the top of the agenda.
And so what were some ways you showed yourself grace?
Pardon me?
What were some ways that you showed yourself grace? Some ways that you took care of yourself as you advocated for the farmers?
Well, I think in my organizing work, we're still working with the Dolores Huerta Foundation. We work in our communities, again, to empower people, to get the parents and students, get them involved in the education system. Mm-hmm. We had to file a lawsuit against our current high school district because they expelled 2,500 students in 1 year. Wow. And mostly students of color. Mm. So we sued them because this was just outright discrimination. Absolutely. And we got that number down from 2,500 to 21. So the work that we do in the community is to get people to fight some of those racist policies that still exist. Yeah. That is the work that our foundation does. And so we also have a great youth program. Okay. One of our youth was just recognized by the California Endowment in California. And some of our youth, since because they start when they're like 11 years old, right? Yes. And then they go through our program. But all of the seniors, the high school seniors in our youth program, all graduated, and they're all going to college. All right. So I think that deserves a lot. Doing that. Absolutely. That is so important.
And so what I'm getting from you is that we don't necessarily have to do a spa day. Do you think spa days are still just a waste of time?
No.
Okay.
Of course not.
Just making sure we can throw that in.
And I think we have to get more people involved also. Yes. in being mental health activists and mental health practitioners,
Absolutely. And so one of the questions I personally wanted to ask, do you believe if we continue to do the work and fight the fight that we are doing now, especially with the climate of this election season, do you think we'll get to a point where we can start chanting "Si se pudo," which means we did it?
Well, now should we, not can we, but we have to. This is something that all of us have to become committed to do this. We've got to save our world. We've got to save our children. Absolutely. So all of us have to really, you might say, ramp up whatever we're doing now and just make it stronger and organize and recruit other people to help us. We have to do it. It's a mandate for us that we have to fight for our kids. Yes. And we have to fight for our country. We have to fight for our democracy. Absolutely. And we're the only ones that can do it.
Absolutely. Dolores, thank you so much.
Oh, no, you're welcome.
I am finished with my questions, but I do want to take some questions from out in the audience. I've given you all just a little bit more time because I know that we're antsy to ask Dolores some questions. So at this time, I have Petra and Erica who are on the floor, and we'll now be taking questions from the audience. Thank you so much. Anybody have a question for Dolores? Okay, we have one here.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for being here. Can you just talk a little bit about the Unity Club and the Filipino background and how that came to the United Farm Workers Union?
I didn't get that.
Oh, could you repeat the question for us? I'm sorry.
The Unity Club?
The Farm Worker Club.
And how the Filipinos helped to bring that to the United Farm Workers.
Oh, thank you. Oh, that was actually started by Luis Valdez. Luis Valdez is a drama teacher, you might say, and he was part of the farm worker movement. And he's the one that brought that to the farm workers about doing that unity clap, so we can all clap together and be unified. But Luis Valdez, you can check him out. He's got several plays that he has written, and they have been performed here in Los Angeles, also on Broadway. Okay. Luis Valdez, Teatro Campesino. And they still have a place there in San Juan Bautista where they perform plays.
Okay. Thank you. Another question. Okay, Great.
Dolores, thank you for being here. I have a question. I'm hoping that this is true. Is there actually an opera being made about your life right now?
Is there an opera being made about your life right now?
Oh, yes, there is.
Tell us a little.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I have a cousin, kind of a distant cousin. You know, one of my great grandfathers actually came from England, and he was actually part of the Civil War. And his name was Marshal St. John. So one of my St. John cousins, who happens to be a teacher at USC, is doing an opera. He just got the Guggenheim Fellowship also. His name is Nick Benavides, and his dad is his mom is a St. John. Okay, so he's my cousin. So he's doing an opera, and they've already done some of the rehearsals in San Francisco. So I've done this year though.
Yeah, that's so neat. I think we'll be tuned in for sure. For a question in the back.
Hi, Dolores. My name's Ben, right here. Along the way, we got to watch your movie yesterday, and so we got to see a lot of what you've done, and we've studied some of what you've done. You've done some incredible things, but I imagine to do the amazing things, you had to make quite a few mistakes along the way. Could you talk to us about maybe things that you tried and failed at, or mistakes you made that you learned from and then were able to conquer bigger mountains because you made those mistakes? Could you tell us some stories about that?
Something that I tried and failed at.
Yes, so some things that you've tried and failed, but also some things that maybe you've tried and failed and learned from those experiences. How were you able to expound on those?
Yeah, well, I always think that you do learn from your failures, right? They're our best, absolutely our best teachers. Well, I wanted to be a flamenco dancer. But my teacher left to dance with Jose Greco, the famous flamenco dancer, so I failed at that, I guess. And probably, I think, the other thing, I went to go register at Berkeley, to go to college at Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, and I got there one day too late. But my whole life would have been so different, because had I gone to Berkeley, I may have never met Fred Ross Sr. I may have never gotten involved with farm workers to begin with, you know?
Absolutely.
So it's the way that life has a path for you.
Yes.
I never ever in my wildest dreams as a teenager thought that I would be a labor organizer. I never imagined that.
Yeah.
So again, you have to have faith in life. The other thing I do want to say too, when we talked about having a good, healthy things for children, I think dancing is very important, okay? Dancing, drama, singing, art, and I think the more that we can get children involved in dancing, it's really, really good, and drama, you know, doing plays,
Yes.
because it's just really, they can bring out their true self. And also dancing is very healthy, okay? Because if you dance when you're young, then you can march when you're older. And you can keep walking when you're 94 years old like me.
Absolutely, I love that. Okay, we have two questions here. We're gonna get one and then we'll get you next, Paula. Oh, okay.
Hi, my name is Paula. There was a part of the video yesterday where one of your daughters talked about wanting to change her nose, and she said that you looked at her and you said, "Don't you dare touch that nose." And it was a part that really stood out to me and was important to me. But I wanted to ask you, there were lots of like critiques of how you did things, especially in how you mothered. I'm a mother. And it sounded like you had so much sureness and confidence in like telling your child, like, you better not touch your nose. Were there people that talked positive affirmations, or were there people that talked positive things into you at that time, or were you talking it into yourself, and what did that look like amongst all the critiques?
Well, my mother always told me, you can always just be yourself. Be proud of who you are, you know? And you don't have to apologize for who you are or pretend that you're somebody else, you know? And that has really held true for me. No matter who you're with, you always be yourself. And I pass it on to my children also, so they can be proud of their heritage and be proud of who they are. Because I know, unfortunately, in our country, we have the Anglo-European standard of beauty, and we know that that is not the world standard. And so we have to really appreciate, you know, people's beauty. It may not be what we're used to, but we have to respect that and appreciate it, and don't expect everybody to look like the model that we see, you know, in Vanity Fair, on the cover of Vanity Fair. Does that answer your question?
We have,
Were you speaking yourself lifted?
Well, so
Or
sometimes
was
it's
your
kind,
mother's?
yeah,
that
sometimes,
helped you?
especially when teenagers, because teenagers always want to kind of look like each other, right? And another thing my mother always told me, don't afraid to be different. You don't have to be like everybody else. You don't have to look like everybody else. You don't have to dress like everybody else. Always be different. Always be your own person. And I think that's really important for young people to know that you don't have to look like somebody else or dress like somebody else. You can have your own style.
Thank you. So we have one here, and
Dolores,
then
thanks
we'll
so
go.
much for being here. It's wonderful to be in the same space with you. Earlier this morning, we were sort of talking about in a session that you have to, for advocacy, you have to sort of reach people where they are, and you have to reach them through avenues which they are comfortable with. So, for example, email may not work with certain set of people, but social media or Facebook might work. I'm really curious to hear from you, given social media and the use of social media for advocacy now. Your reflections on if you had social media back when you were organizing farm workers. Do you think it would have been any different? Any thoughts on sort of pros and cons of social media versus the person-to-person approach that you had? Knocking on doors. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on that.
That's a long question.
Yes, so we have social media today, so we want to know, do you think anything have been different back when you were advocating, if you had social media and the technology that we have today? Do you think anything would be different, or do you think you would have been able to continue to reach the amount of individuals that you were?
Yeah, I think it would have helped a lot had we had social media, because our message could have gotten out faster. But on the other hand, there's so much misinformation on social media. So I don't know whether the opposition, it would have been easier for them also to turn people against us, as we see what is happening in today's world, right? Because the truth gets out there and then the truth gets hammered, and then you have, misinformation that is given out to people. But I think it is helpful. And I think we've seen that. We saw that when George Floyd was murdered, that, social media was able to get all of these marches all over the world, not just in the United States of America. But the other thing about that is that with all of the marches and all the demonstrations, nothing changed, because the law that they were trying to pass in the Congress to make police accountable, to take away their immunity from prosecution, that is still there. So that's, again, going back to today, National Voter Registration Day, the only way that we can make policies change is when we vote and we elect people to Congress and to our state legislatures to pass the laws to change the policies, okay? So, but I think, again, maybe that's what we have to get social media to focus on like how democracy works. And it starts with voting. It starts with voting.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. I have a question here, Petra.
Hi, first, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for all your organizing and your labor. It's the ultimate kind of caregiving and mothering of a community, is to organize for our communities, I think. Something that I think is really beautiful and challenging about organizing is that we're often playing the long game, right? And so because you have this beautiful long history of doing this work, we're often seeding things and we don't know what we're seeding, right? And we don't get to see the end always of what we're seeding. Is there something that you have, la semilla, that you've put into your community, or something that a person that you worked with that now is doing something that you couldn't even imagine? And could you talk a little bit about that? Like the thing that maybe happened 20 years ago that you never expected you were going to get to this point, or someone would get to that point that you helped seed?
So has anything happened that when you originally started advocating that has happened that you thought we might have never gotten here, but we were able to get here? Is there something that you can think of? Something and someone.
Move the movement even farther because you were organizing that.
Okay, so because you were organizing that person, is it something or someone that helped move the movement even further than what you could have imagined?
I can say that there were people that moved the movement backward. That there were people who took advantage of the movement to empower themselves and to enhance their own careers and at the same time trash the movement. And that's another long story, but people that we depended on, the double crossed us pretty much. You know, people that came out of the movement and got high positions and then turned against us and set the movement back a lot. And so I think that's something that we have to be aware that that does happen in people, that people do get corrupted and people that we trust, unfortunately, will turn against us. I have seen that happen. In terms of moving us forward, again, I just have to say that it was pretty much people driven. And it's pretty much like the women's movement, right? It took women 100 years to get the right to vote. You know, it's taken us 100 years to get the Equal Rights Amendment, you know? So, you know, we have to just, but we know that there were women that were actually against giving women, and there are still women out there today that are working against women's rights, reproductive rights. You know, we see them out there, they're actually working against us. So I think that's part of life. That's really part of life. I guess the one person that could have probably helped all of us was Robert Kennedy, Senator Robert Kennedy, but as we all know, he was killed, right? And so when we lose somebody like that, somebody like him, that just sets us back a lot.
Thank you again for coming here. My question is, when we listen to your story, we hear so many hats that you've worn, from teacher to labor organizer. You mentioned today working on rental assistance, deputy sheriff, that one was new. You've been an activist, you've helped get people elected, and you do voter engagement. Have you ever considered running for office yourself? With all of this trajectory, with all of this work, with this vision that you have you been encouraged? Have you ever thought about that? And why, of all the paths, did you perhaps not end up in that path that so many people often end up in when they have a history like yours that's so tremendous in terms of their impact?
Oh, I have a lot of respect for people that run for office, especially women, because I know how difficult that is. But I do believe that, again, organizing people to make them understand that they have power, that they can elect someone that they would like to represent them, or they can have themselves elected, right? I think that's really more powerful than for me to be up there and doing the policies, right? I think it's more important to keep organizing. I think it's like, sometimes I think it's like having some kind of magical dust that you can meet with people and you can throw this dust at them and say, you have power and you can make changes. And all you need is yourself. This is all you need, yourself and the people that you know, to come together, take direct nonviolent action. You know, both of the people that we want to represent us, and this is how we win. It's so simple, but so hard. So simple, but so hard.
And so you've never considered running
No.
for public office? Okay, good question. Do we have another? Okay, have another one here.
Huge honor, Dolores, thank you for being here. My question is about organizing farm workers, specifically with members. So we organize farm workers who speak Mam, Quiche, Canchoal, indigenous languages of Guatemala in South Florida. I just recently read a book about the strategy behind the UFW, why David sometimes wins. And I'm curious about what the lowest point of your work was, organizing farm workers. The most, I guess, the time that you struggled the most, and how did you overcome those struggles and those disappointments within the membership themselves?
So what was one of the lowest points that you had while doing this work? And how did you overcome that, working with the farmers?
I think the way that we overcome when we have those low points is by faith. That we have to have faith in ourselves and we have to have faith in people. And that occurred to us with the Farm Workers Union. When the Teamsters Union, Ronald Reagan and President Nixon all came together to destroy the organization. And we had like 100,000 workers under contract that were getting their medical plan, their pension plan, toilets in the fields, their drinking water, and the respirators, et cetera. And from one day to the next, we lost everything. Because the Teamsters came in and signed sweetheart contract with the growers, and we lost everything. So that was a low point. What did we do? We went back and had another boycott. And this time we boycotted not only grapes, we boycotted gala wine, we boycotted lettuce, all three at the same time. And the American public, all you people out there supported us, and we beat them. We beat Reagan, we beat Nixon, and we beat the Teamsters, okay? Yeah. So it's organizing.
So, my name is Erica Fung. So glad you're here today. I come from a family of farm workers from Salinas, so I'm very grateful for your work. One thing I've noticed, though, is even within my own family, there is a lack of activism and there is an apathy, even amongst people who came from farm workers who have so benefited from all the work you did. How do we turn that around and get people of Latino descent back engaged and inspired?
Well, I guess my easy answer is to say organize, and organize. But I also think that we have to do more than that. We've got to put, again, I mentioned earlier about teaching children in elementary school that we are all one family, right? Homo sapiens, that our human race came from Africa. We have to teach little children that men and women are equal, all right? From the time that they're small, we have to teach them labor history, but we also have to teach them about civics, about how to vote, why voting is important. There is a group here in Santa Ana, California, and every year they have what they call a kindergarten. They have children in kindergarten, and they have a little capsule have the year that they're going to graduate from high school. And they take them to one of the college campuses, okay? And then on the college campus, they get to meet people like that are firemen and doctors and teachers and, people that they might want to be. And then, guess what? They have an election. They get to vote for Donald Duck or Minnie Mouse or Goofy. And so they have an election, they actually have ballots. And so they teach them from the time that they're in kindergarten how to vote. And that's what we have to do. We have to teach people about how democracy works and make people understand that if we do not participate, we don't have a democracy. So I think it has to be taught in our schools. We have to get people engaged because I think it's been stifled and I think it's been done for a purpose. Just like our education system. Our educational system, and I do have to say this, we have more people in prison in the United States of America than India or China. India or China have billions of people in their population. We only have 300 million. How is it that we have more people in prison in the United States than these huge countries like India or China? Who's in prison? It's Black, brown, and poor white people that are in prison, okay? So there's a prison industrial complex. In California, our prison budget has more money than our high school budget in here in California.
Wow.
So we can see that things are upside down and that we have to fight more to get more money in education. And when we think of it at the national level, what's our biggest budget? The Defense Department. What's our smallest budget? Education, okay? So if we're going to save our country, all of these things that we've been talking about, we're gonna have to get more money in our education and starting at the elementary school level and change the way that education is funded, because that's gotta be the savior of our country. We're talking about saving our kids. We've gotta get the resources to be able to do that. And I wanna throw in one more thing. Coretta Scott King, she and I traveled together when she was fighting for the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. And Coretta said this, and I know you're gonna love this when I say it.
Yes.
She said this, we will never have peace in the world until women take power. I kind of amended that to say we will never have peace in the world until feminists take power, okay? Because we know that the men in the room here today are feminists. We want to give them a big applause also.
Yes.
All right.
We'll give them a round. Absolutely. I think we have time to have another question. Maybe for about one more question. Okay, we have here. And then we'll have our last one.
Good afternoon, Ms. Huerta. In the long journey of your life and all of the accomplishments that you've had, what are your proudest moments?
What are your proudest moments of your entire journey?
My proudest moments, I think when we signed our first contracts with the growers, because I was a negotiator, and I think when I got the Medal of Freedom from President Obama, and then I think when we passed the amnesty bill of 1986, because I knew so many people that got the legalization status when that happened.
We love that. We have one more question here that we're going to take.
Hi, I have a question. Which is your favorite nonprofit organization? That's a joke. I'm Cesar Chavez, and I'm the executive director of the Dolores Huerta Foundation and her youngest daughter, choice number 11. And I just wanted to take a couple seconds for a plug. For those of you that are in the LA area, we are having an event that will benefit our organization here in LA on October 10th. So come and see me if you're interested. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. For those of us who aren't in LA, if you take the survey at the end of the event, we'll be making a donation in your name to the foundation as well. So there's ways to participate if you're not in LA.
So thank you. We have 13 chapters up and down the Central Valley, and we organize, again, the farm worker families and the communities to fight for their rights, you know, we're trying to get them to run for school boards, for city council, you know, and they have done some incredible things. Infrastructure, one of our groups, they passed a bond issue to have a brand new gymnasium for their middle school that they didn't have. They've been able to get swimming pools and parks and curbs, sidewalks, and gutters, and getting themselves elected to school board and the city council. And one of our groups took over the water company, which had been run by a group in Texas. And so they did all of the work, and they were able to take over the water company and get themselves elected to the board and run their own water company. So it's building power from the grassroots up. That's what we do with the Dolores Huerta Foundation.
All right, and so would you say that that is your favorite nonprofit?
Well, I know there's a lot of nonprofits out there, and everybody's doing good work.
Yeah.
And yes, definitely, we want to promote all nonprofits and all of the great work they do, that we do. We all do.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much. Do we have any last question? All right. So I want to thank you, Ms. Huerta, for joining us today and sharing yourself and your learnings with all of us. It is a distinct honor to not only be in the same room as you, but for you to be so open to each and every one of us. And so we don't often get to meet our heroes, but today so many of us are doing just that with you being here. So thank you again, Ms. Huerta. And I am not, we can, for sure. And I am not alone. We all want to thank you not only for joining us today, but for your lifetime of work that has paved the way for all of us. And like I say, to be able to walk so that we can absolutely run. And from the bottom of our hearts here at Voices and myself, thank you again. And we just wanted to, just a small token of our appreciation, I think myself and the audience want to just say thank you.
Awesome. Oh my goodness, that's beautiful.
Yes.
So I would like to ask everybody to stand up for a minute. Send them and I'll send them to, okay?
All right, let's do it.
Okay, and I'm gonna ask you all a couple of questions, and I think you know the answers, all right? So the first question I'm gonna ask you. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the first question I'm gonna ask you who's got the power, and I want you to say, we've got the power. Then the second question is, what kind of power? I want you to say people power, all right?
Right.
But I want you to shout it so loud so all the haters can hear us.
Yes.
Okay, so let's go. Who's got the power? We got it! I think we can do a little bit better than that, okay? Let's take a deep breath, okay? Let's go one more time. Who's got the power? We got the power. You got people power to save democracy, to save our country, to save our youth. What do we say? Let's do it with an organized hand clap. Let's go. Thank you very much for having me. And thank you for all the work that you're doing. Oh my goodness.